Welcome back. This week, we discussed the 1985 teen classic, The Breakfast Club. And when you think about teenage comedies, The Breakfast Club is certainly at the top of your list. And when you think 80s movies, The Breakfast Club is certainly at the top of your list. And would you believe that when John Hughes began production on The Breakfast Club in March 1984, he had an indie budget of just $1 million. And that's about $2.5 million today, adjusted for inflation. Hughes's debut feature, 16 Candles, wouldn't even hit theaters for another 2 months. Before that, in the 80s, teen comedies were more rooted in sensationalism. Think oversexed comedies like Losing It, Porky's, and Risky Business. Even genuinely great movies like Amy Heckerling's Fast Times at Ridgemont High had an emphasis on shock over heart. And The Breakfast Club had a small cast, primarily because of the script, but then also budget limitations. The cast only comprised 11 people, half of whom were the primary characters in Saturday Detention. And they are 5 kids: a jock, played by Emilio Estevez, a nerd, played by Anthony Michael Hall, a princess, played by Molly Ringwald, an outcast / basket case, played by Ali Sheedy, and a delinquent, a criminal, if you will, played by Judd Nelson. And The Breakfast Club brought them all together on one fateful Saturday. And for anyone who has been in detention, especially all-day detention, yes, that's a real thing that yours truly had to endure to graduate high school. You know that all-day detention would certainly be better with a room full of Gen X angsty teenagers. And The Breakfast Club's heart derives from the characters bumping off each other, and certainly at the behest and instigation of Bender. But such as they are, the twists really hinge on the teenagers realizing that their surface impressions of one another is wrong. And that has really become a common trope in the teenage rom-com. And the film's most lasting effect was to create a template for taking the inner lives of teenagers seriously. The Breakfast Club was unique because of how John Hughes wrote his story, through long, drawn-out conversations that built to teary, emotional realizations. The movie is basically a stage play unfolding in a series of close-ups, a film style that led to big box office returns. And from that paltry $1 million budget, The Breakfast Club made $45 million, $115 million today. Not too shabby. Along with that, The Breakfast Club inspired a wave of films about growing up, including Pretty in Pink, starring Molly Ringwald as well, and Some Kind of Wonderful, also written by Hughes, Stand By Me, Four Keeps, Dead Poets Society, and previous episode, Say Anything. After the film was a hit, the media referred to the film's 5 main characters and some of their other Hollywood friends as the Brat Pack. And the emotions worked through The Breakfast Club are often uncomfortably raw, and of course, this was John Hughes's intention. Hughes refused to cut away from his characters when they're realizing a deeper truth about themselves, even if it's something as obvious as admitting that being a virgin in high school is not the end of the world. I guess that's what college is for, right, Anthony Michael Hall? Hughes captures the mood swings that come with being a teenager. Brian, Anthony Michael Hall, talks about suicide ideation in practically the same breath as he giggles about his own nerdiness. And when Andrew, played by Emilio Estevez, finally feels comfortable enough talking about himself, he expresses that relief physically, tearing off his shirt and running through the library with glee. Its heroes are just kids sitting in a circle engaging in basically makeshift group therapy. Assistant Principal Richard Vernon, played by the late Paul Gleason, is a suburban tin pot-esque wannabe dictator keeping watch over detention and complains to the janitor Carl about what really frightens him about his students. Quote, "When you get old, these kids, when I get old, they're going to be running the country," he sighs. The boomers really had it out for Gen X, didn't they? But this sentiment is set against the film's most unexpected scene, in which Assistant Principal Vernon and Carl drink a beer together and argue about the kids. Beer at school, in the afternoon, the 80s. They each take side of the great debate that older generations have always had and will always have about the younger generation. Vernon insists that kids have changed and have become more arrogant with every passing year. They've, quote, turned on him. And Carl quips that when he was young, he wanted to be John Lennon, while countering that it's not the kids, but Vernon himself who has changed. If Vernon were 16, Carl asks, what would he think of himself now? And the film pivots on this insight contained in this debate, which is that there's no right answer. Sometimes the man of the year becomes janitor at his alma mater, and sometimes an idealistic teacher becomes a despotic assistant principal. The circle of life, I guess. It's often said that The Breakfast Club is unduly harsh in its depiction of adult world. There's certainly more conflict between children and their parents portrayed here than you would normally see in a classic coming-of-age film. But again, this is the template that John Hughes gave us and continues to be presented in teen rom-coms going forward. Claire's popularity subjects her to intense peer pressure, while her bickering parents use her against each other. She received detention because she wanted to do a little retail therapy, so she skipped school to go shopping. Hey, been there. John reveals the abuse he and his mother suffer from his father and is serving detention for pulling a fire alarm. Andrew, intimidated by his father to succeed in sports, was given detention for taping a student's buttocks together in an attempt to win his teammates, but most importantly, his father's approval. And Brian is under such pressure from his parents to get good grades that he contemplated suicide after earning an F in shop class and was sent to detention for bringing a flare gun to school to kill himself. And certainly this is a dark topic we are all too familiar with today, but was a very novel concept in 1984. Allison, on the other hand, is a compulsive liar with neglectful parents, constantly stealing things to use should she ever decide to run away from home, and admits she showed up to detention for lack of anything better to do on a Saturday. And despite their differences, the students realize they all face similar problems. Andrew and Allison bond over their complex relationships with their parents. Brian and Claire share the same anxiety over being virgins, although the friends suspect that their newfound bond will be over once detention ends. And certainly, what would Monday have been like at that school? The theme of the film is the constant struggle by the American teenager to be understood by adults and, most importantly, by themselves. It explores the pressures put on teenagers to fit into their own realms of high school social constructs, as well as the lofty expectations of their parents, teachers, and other authority figures. Once the obvious stereotypes are broken down by the Breakfast Club, the characters empathize with each other's struggles, dismiss some of the inaccuracies of their first impressions, and discover that they are more similar than different. And one of the lasting effects of the Breakfast Club was that it launched the careers of Molly Ringwald, Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, and Ali Sheedy. Again, they were founding members of the Brat Pack. And it's easy to see why the Breakfast Club has been called the quintessential film of the 1980s. And don't you forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a thing. And I'll stop singing. So we appreciate our listeners, our viewers, our supporters. New episodes of the Real Relationships podcast drop every Thursday on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get podcasts. New episodes of this show premiere every Thursday on YouTube. We appreciate our listeners, our viewers, our supporters, and we will see you soon.